Hello everyone, and welcome to a special episode on the Hearts of Iron 4 Kaiserreich Germany series. Today I'll be talking about my motivation for playing this, how I'm constructing the story, and just a few comments on the decisions and the parallels on the whole thing. So the first thing probably everyone has been asking me a lot in the comments is, how on earth are you playing this 400 episodes? You could have done this in 4 hours, I think was one of or in a couple of hours. Yes and no. So gameplay-wise, probably yes. But in terms of delving into the lore and developing a story on top of the whole thing. And I think this is kind of what I'm trying to do here. It's not just play the game, because, you get a million YouTube videos of somebody playing the game, usually cut down to about 20 minutes. And I personally have stopped watching these because I just don't find them engaging. So I would like to make something that is more on the long term and more on the story side of things, and sort of world building in this alternate history universe here that we have. Now, in the very beginning, the next question then came up. I had played this blind, so I didn't know what was coming. But the question came up, why did you play von Schleicher? Why not the Democratic Union? Why not SWR? So Democratic Union would have been the sort of liberal democratic side, SWR would have been the conservative side, and I found von Schleicher simply the most interesting. First of all, because obviously he was a real existing historical figure, and he was the chancellor for a short period until he got shot. And in some ways, he was also somewhat instrumental in allying himself out of convenience or necessity with the wrong people. And that was sort of my first overarching plot arc that I wanted to go with. So for me, von Schleicher was somebody who looked at the German Empire in a time of peril, where the empire was facing deep internal troubles, similar to like a Weimar Republic sort of setup, and which is at least my gut feeling what the devs intended here. And deep internal strife, it was torn from the inside, and it was facing a massive threat from the outside. Obviously from the syndicalist France and Britain, who were doing the World Revolution thing, and from the revanchism of the Russian Empire. So as a German, you look at something that isn't efficient, something that is wasteful, something that is not optimal, and it feels wrong. So to a certain degree, I could absolutely identify with putting myself into that position, saying you look at this and you say you have a country here which is having so many problems and so much internal division, and you have so much external threat, and then you want to do something about it. You want to streamline things, you want to optimize things, you want to make it as strong internally as possible, as unified as possible, so you can face that existential threat from the outside. At the same time, however, von Schleicher was also the Red General. He was the one with the Querverbindung. He was the one who would talk to everybody. So he did not have the political preconception of saying, oh, I will not talk to this side out of my political standing or for my dislike with their political standing. This is both, again, something that I kind of can identify with, but at the same time also, at least in how I wanted to develop the story, has its dangers. Because while talking to a side of a certain conviction is absolutely fine, and checking your own convictions is also fine, getting them into power can be a little more dangerous. And I think this is sort of where I wanted to go with the internal direction of where the red part of the general eventually started to fade, simply because the left, the socialist left in Germany, being under a very extreme left threat from France and Britain, sort of felt too much of a hindrance eventually down the road, and was less aligned with the sort of streamlined, unified, militaristic right that von Schleicher eventually allied with, which again has the historical parallel to some degree. So over time, Germany then became more and more militarized and became And things started to happen in Germany that probably von Schleicher didn't like, and that many people probably wouldn't like disappearance of political dissidents. And so there was a clear path towards a Germany that was somewhat similar in its direction to historical Germany in the period, but at the same time was also not going all the way. So we didn't go all the way to genocide. We clearly, whenever the question of racism or anti-Semitism or similar things came up, that was clearly rejected. So while it became a very right-wing militaristic empire, at the same time it wasn't the same sort of drug-fueled, genocidal, supremacist, racial supremacist country that it would eventually become in history. The parallel that I wanted to draw really with Germany was with the United States. And after the whole MacArthur story, so in one of the early episodes, if you forgot about it, German troops were actually assisting MacArthur, who was running in the United States. So my original plan was to sort of end this after France, Britain, and Russia had been defeated, with the United States sort of as a sort of ally in the part. But after MacArthur's and this is not obviously part of the game. This is just some story that I spun into it out of necessity, because I had to improvise a lot. Things happen. I think it was down in Los Angeles, if I'm not, or in San Diego. I'm not somewhere south here, where German troops eventually got cut off because the Americans under MacArthur had to manage several front lines in the area. It's not very good at doing this, so they pulled troops off the lines to put them somewhere else, which means that suddenly the German troops were cut off here, and I had to evacuate, and I think we lost a division or so. And that led to Germany then assisting the American Union in the south, but the syndicalists at that point were way too strong, simply because they were controlling most of the industrial north, and eventually we had to evacuate here as well, because the lines were just breaking everywhere. And this is how the USAS came into being. So the United States suddenly was sort of the Soviet Union of this world, which was perfect for what I was going with, because that allowed me to effectively put another arc after the Weltkrieg has ended, now what, sort of thing. Because I had a look at the focus tree, and there is, so if you scroll out, it's a massive focus tree, but there's a whole, what was this, like a third maybe? Or a fourth maybe of the, close to a third actually of the focus tree is post-Weltkrieg. So all of this stuff down here happens after the Weltkrieg ends. And that sort of created a perfect kind of mirror alignment that I could come up with. As you may have guessed or not, I am a huge fan of Terry Pratchett and his sort of worlds and mirror of worlds. And I really like that sort of concept of pulling these kind of parallels in. So Germany then became the hegemon, or became the hegemon in Europe, Asia, and Africa. But the USAS became the hegemon on the other continent. And interestingly enough, the power balance between the two was also kind of mirrored in that they were really like two superpowers that had their little groups. It was almost tempted to try and use the console to create something like a Washington Pact or something out of this. Just I think it'd be too much on the nose, really. But then we went into the Cold War situation, right? And then what happened? Cold War. One thing that I found really interesting as a story point, and I think that came out of an event. At some point, France. There was an event coming out of France when it was still syndicalist that they were working on nuclear weapons. So I'm not a huge fan of nukes in Hearts of Iron 4 from a gameplay perspective, because they simply don't do what they should do, in my opinion. It's like if I blow up a city. Or two, the country should basically capitulate if they don't have their own nukes. There's a whole area on nuclear doctrine and mutual assured destruction and similar things. and there was a reason that the United States historically have dropped the bombs on Japan. Because after the invasion of Okinawa with Operation Downfall, not Unthinkable, Downfall, which, by the way, had a parallel here with Unternehmen Untergang, if you may have noticed. But Operation Downfall would have been the invasion of the Japanese homelands after Okinawa. And after the losses they had taken, and after they'd seen how suicidal a lot were in Japan, rather to die for the emperor than to surrender, they decided that they made the decision that dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and killing hundreds of thousands of civilians was preferable to a naval invasion, which would have led to the death of many civilians, just not as immediate as with the 2 nuclear bombs, and obviously also to the death of many Americans. So it was a cold, calculated sort of decision, and it's controversial, right? You can say today the United States of America is the only country in the world that has ever dropped nuclear weapons on population centers. Was it right for them to do that or not? Is one question, but it's sort of the parallel that I wanted to bring in, and I really like the sort of thought of how would the Cold War have developed if one side didn't have nuclear weapons? Because that was a big story. So we've got Churchill, who really wanted to nuke the Soviet Union flat out. We've got MacArthur, who in the Korean War really wanted to nuke all of China, which eventually I think cost him his position. And we had the original Manhattan Project and the development of that, where a lot of the impetus for that was a fear that Germany might develop a nuke. And that's what I wanted to sort of play into this here, where a sort of unified, uniparty Germany, very militaristic, has a very existential fear that these nuclear weapons that came out of the whole France event, but then Germany started developing their own nukes, obviously, a bit late in the game from a purely mechanical perspective, but that Germany had that fear that the USAS would develop their own nuke, which they would eventually, and that they would use it. And that's obviously there's no mutual assured destruction, no first use kind of policy in the game. If the AI has a chance, it would then start using the nukes, obviously. But that fear existed in reality, and that was one of the major drivers as well for the Manhattan Project, to say we have to do this because otherwise the Germans might get there first. Now, the Germans were nowhere near it because, I don't know, building your country on racial supremacy and genocide tends to drive scientists and other intelligent people away. And the whole thing didn't get very far, but they didn't know that for sure. So there was a lot of drive for that. So that's kind of where that parallel came from. Then to say, you know what, the USAS might have nukes, might develop nukes, and we were sure they would do it first. And that's the thing with propaganda, right? That's the other thing I wanted to bring in. The people who create the propaganda at some point forget that it's propaganda. And you find people who are not really that well informed in power to make decisions based on their own propaganda at some point, because things develop their own drive there. So obviously, then we had two superpowers in the world. We had Germany, which intentionally hasn't been enlarged and took up like its neighbors, but which sort of led a large militaristic alliance that was posed against the USAS and their puppets in the Americas. Their first wars were proxy wars, and again intentionally. We could have gone into Mexico and assisted with that, but I wanted to let that play out and have that sort of as a proxy war, because it was the Reichspakt going in against the USAS, but Germany wasn't going, because we were dealing with the whole Europe situation, with the occupation problems in France and Britain, and with all the other things. So Germany, after the war, sort of retreated into itself, which has a bit of a parallel with Great Britain in the real Second World War. and had to fix its economy and all kinds of things. So it was a proxy war, and the international alliance that was fighting the communists basically in Mexico in a proxy war was defeated. And we had let me scroll over here. We had historical parallels for that sort of thing, and then that again led to the sort of picturing of the enemy as the one who needs to be contained, the one who needs to have naval bases built around. So we went on an island hopping campaign, and that's sort of where the story thread intertwined. I'd say the American Pacific campaign against Japan with the early Cold War. So it was and with today's sort of American attempts at surrounding enemy countries with bases all around to sort of cut them off from everything else. And we did the same thing. So we had the Atlantic campaign, which was obviously based on the Pacific campaign. We had the big naval battles against the American Navy, the island hopping until we had secured island positions close enough that we could invade Okinawa, well, Florida, really, and then go into the American heartland while dropping the two nukes. So there was another parallel there, and that's one that I really wanted to spin in there. But I think the last point I wanted to make, the parallel with when it comes, if you look at Germany. So in this universe, Germany has sort of become the United States. So you could say, well, Germany has a uniparty. It is highly militarized. People get disappeared. It wages war in far-flung countries. It's not the US, not 100%, but there are definitely foreign policy sort of decisions in the United States today that are being supported by both sides of the coin. Some people argue that the two parties in the U.S. really are, when it comes to many political areas, really are the same side, or the two sides of the same coin. And obviously, militarism is something that's on the rise. And so, I think the sort of temptation to go, if you have large internal problems, and this ties it back to the beginning of the whole series. If you have large internal problems in a country and a huge division between huge political division, large economic problems, and you then get the demagogues and the people who promise easy solutions to difficult problems, and who promise greatness to the country, or to return the country to its glory, sort of thing. But as von Schleicher found out the hard way in the end, is that a certain amount of chaos and a certain amount of inefficiency is actually a feature of a democracy, because you have disagreement and you have consensus and you have these sort of things. These are not optimal. A democracy is not an optimal form of government. The biggest feature of democracy is that you don't have to get the torches and pitchforks out to get rid of your leaders, and that you obviously need to find some form of consensus around things. Whereas if you had an autocratic system, if you have a good leader, then, and everybody agrees with them, then that is obviously way more optimal in terms of efficiency, resource usage, and also in terms of power, really, than a democratic system. But a democratic system is more resilient against the sort of, what if you have a bad leader and makes these kind of decisions? And this was the part in Germany back in the 1930s, when Germany was reeling from external pressure, internal division, from revolutions, from massive economic problems. And then people came around and said, you know what, there's an easy solution for this. And it's all the fault of these people over there. I found it an interesting parallel that I wanted to weave into this, on how bad results, or you can debate if it's a bad result or not, but how unpleasant results. And if we're talking about like people being, quietly murdered in the streets, you could argue people quietly being arrested and put somewhere very unpleasant, or bombed somewhere in the world, is not a desirable outcome. And you need sort of and you can get there by following a path of good intentions. So that's how we got to the. Put it like that because it looks much better. We've got the Reichspakt versus the. Let's call it the Washington Pact, and or the Washington Alliance or something. And that the obvious parallel here is that this would be NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. And we're playing this out in a what if the early Cold War had gone hot, simply because somebody would have gone and started flinging the nukes before the other side was ready. And there were definitely periods when that could have happened, I think, in my opinion, from my reading of history during confrontations like in Korea, especially in Korea, for example, where this could have happened. And this could have escalated way, way, way further. So that's the overall sort of story I wanted to weave into that. And that's why this takes so long, because I am not just playing Hearts of Iron 4, but I am having a few more ideas that I'm sort of overlaying over the top of it. And I'm really keen to start the next series as well, with everything updated. I haven't even seen yet what's in Götterdämmerung, but and then the subsequent DLCs. But for the next series, everything will be updated. So new mechanics, better combat AI, the special mission, the special operations, the secret research projects, all kinds of stuff that I haven't even tried out yet. So a lot of new things that we'll be seeing in the next series, where we will be playing as Russia. And I have made a storyboard for the next series, and I've got what I hope might be an interesting idea to make it a bit different from this one. But we will see how you like it. Obviously, plenty of opportunity to flow in or to weave in current events and some historical nods and nudges here and there. And right, that's it for me today. I think I'm talking long enough. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.